Tec Sounds presents EduTrends.
Welcome to the EduTrends podcast and webcast brought to you by the Institute for the Future of Education. I'm José Pepe Escamilla, Associate Director of the Institute for the Future of Education. And today's guest is Richard Culatta. He is the CEO of the International Society for Technology in Education. Richard, it's a pleasure to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
Thanks. So we were talking during your visit here in Monterrey in end of September 2023, about your career here. So you started doing things for training in the CIA, then you were in the government, sometimes with the Obama administration, and now you're leading here, among other things. But most of your work is related to transform education. So I wanted to ask you where that passion comes from. Why?
It's a great question. I think some of it came from being in a family of two educators. Both my mom and my dad were career educators. Part of it, though, to be completely honest, just between you and me and the thousands of friends that are listening in, is I was really frustrated with my own education experience. There were some ways that the education that I experienced didn't serve me well. And I remember as I struggled through thinking, we got to be able to do better than this. We got to be able to do, there's got to be a kid like me that should be able to get through a program like this and not hate it. And so a lot of my drive was to say, how can we really improve the user experience of education? How do we make it be the type of experience that kids and older adults, because obviously we're talking about learning at all ages, how do we make it be something that people really want to be part of?
Right. And how being the CEO for ISTE makes you realize that dream, that view?
Well, certainly it means there's a lot of work that I have to do, but that is part of what we try to do, and that's why I love being part of the team at ISTE, because that's really what we're about. We're about saying, how do we create great learning experiences and use technology to help do that? Look, Pepe, we talk about, I meet with schools all the time, and they talk about being learner-centered, having students at the center and keeping it all about student-centered. We hear this a lot, but often I say, there are a lot of things that I don't want to be at the center of, right? I don't want to be at the center of a terrible traffic jam. I don't want to be at the center of a medical appointment where I'm getting poked by shots and having all kinds of, right? So just putting students at the center isn't good enough. We have to create an experience that students want to be at the center of. And I think that's a bit of a shift for us as education leaders to be able to think, not just do we keep students at the center, but do we create an experience that students are excited about being at the center of?
That's a very interesting shift. So how can we make students excited to be at the center?
Look, that is the question, and it's what we should all be focusing a lot on. And frankly, it's what I love about your center here, because you do a lot of focus of that. But a couple things that we found. One is tying, and this sounds really obvious, right? But tying to the interests of students, making learning relevant to them is critically important, and we don't do that as well as we should. We often say, you have to learn this skill. You have to learn to divide fractions. And students go, why? And go, doesn't matter, just learn it, because you'll need it for a job someday, right? That's not good enough. We got to do better than that. So finding ways to make the curriculum feel relevant to the learners is really key. That's one piece of it.
So that's how can we make them understand how they could transfer that into real work?
Right. It's answering the why, right? It's why. Look, so I'm a pilot. I fly planes, and I hated math. Turns out you need to know some math to fly a plane. And if there had been any attempt at making a connection, drawing a line for me between learning math and being able to be a good pilot someday, you wouldn't have been able to kick me out of the class at the end of my math classes, right? But even that level of connection was never made. And that's the sort of thing. So we have to really make sure that learning is relevant. And so that's the first part. The second part, if I had to just pick two, we could talk about a bunch of ways to do this, but I just had to pick two. One is make it relevant. The second is making sure that the learning experience is competency based, right? It is that we are moving on with what we teach in a series of skills that we're learning when a student has demonstrated mastery. So much of what happens in learning is we present a concept, the student doesn't totally get it, and we go, it's Wednesday, time to move on to the next chapter. And so they already are not totally getting this concept. And now we're moving on to another concept that builds on this one, and they're not going to get this one either. On the flip side, you have some students that already understood this because they knew it before coming into my class, and they got to sit there and they got to wait for me because it's not Wednesday yet when it's time to move on to the next subject. And so that idea of helping students be able to view and measure their own abilities, their own competencies, and allow that to be the trigger that moves them on to the next skill, and combine that with the relevancy, and you have a recipe for a really healthy learning environment.
So the second part is what is also called mastery learning.
Sure. It's called, there's lots of things. We call it competency-based, we call it mastery learning, sometimes we call it personalized learning. There's a bunch of labels that people put on it, but however you do it, it means actually, checking a student's ability, and based on their demonstrated ability, that's when they move on to the next skill. And if they aren't ready, then we have other, opportunities to deepen their understanding before they move on.
Yeah. Yes. And so IST is about technology.
Yes.
So what's the role of technology in this student that want to be at the center?
I'm so glad you asked. So look, both of these things that we just talked about, making learning relevant and having the opportunity for sort of mastery-based progression, they're very hard to do if you don't have some tools to support it. I used to be a teacher, right? And I had, I taught high school. So I had 5 classes a day times 30 kids. That is a lot of students to try to adapt to make it relevant and to try to have, any sort of mastery-based progression. That would be very, very time-consuming, very, very difficult to do without technology. Technology can help support both of those activities. And on top of that, it adds another piece, which is really critical, which is it can bring in collaboration with experts, collaboration with other peers. I think one of the least interesting things that we do with technology is use it to present content to students. And the most interesting thing we could and should be doing with technology is use it to make connections, human connections with other peers, with other experts. And so those are all ways that if technology is used effectively, it can make the learning a really powerful experience for students. Unfortunately, most huge amounts of our technology use in education don't use it in those ways. The vast majority of the way that we see technology used is, here's some information that I'm putting on a screen that I'm presenting to you, and the kid, hits next, and they cycle through, and then they take a quiz at the end. It is about pushing out content to the student. And that's really unfortunate because we have devices that are very powerful, but not being used in a very powerful way.
Mm-hmm. So making those connections among peers, but also about experts, is like bringing people to the learning experience that I've known in the classroom.
Sure, 100%. Look, we are in one of the top institutions in the world right here at Tec de Monterrey, right? And even so, the vast majority of experts on any topic aren't here, right? They're in other places, in other parts of the world. It's just, no matter who you are, the experts are somewhere else. But there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to tap into those experts to engage with learners along the way. And of course, remember, it's one thing to tap into experts, and very powerful to do that. But there's also an important skill for students to be able to learn to collaborate with peers who may be in different parts of the world or different cultures or have different viewpoints. And so that sort of collaboration is also very important.
So during the pandemic, there was a huge amount of investment in the use of technology in schools and universities. etc. And there were many things that were done as an emergency response to that were not necessarily good online learning practices, etc.
Yep.
But we talk about a lot about how education will change after this. So we have seen also that many of the expenditure on educational technology has been going down.
Yep.
I'm not sure if it's about the levels before the pandemic. So how true it is that what happened in the pandemic, the use of technology, and also maybe the realization that what we were teaching was bad pedagogy, and was that bad pedagogy was amplified but by use of technology somehow, and people realized they had to make changes, etc., and reaching out to other professors and looking at ways of keeping the students engaged. What has happened after that?
Yeah. So I think there's a really important distinction that we need to make here, which is that the type of learning that was happening during the pandemic was not what I would call effective digital learning. I would call it emergency remote learning. And sometimes I compare it to if you're out in the wilderness hiking somewhere, and a big storm comes up, and all of a sudden, it's raining, there's lightning, you're in a dangerous situation, and you come across a tent. It's a shelter. And you can go and stay in that shelter, and it's wonderful during the time. It saves your life, right? But you don't want to live there for the rest of your life. It met an emergency need. At some point, you want to live in a place that's, comfortable, that does more than meet an emergency need. You want to live in a house with a foundation and electricity and, stuff like that, right? And I think that's how we should be thinking about the type of digital learning that happened during the pandemic. What we did was the tent in the woods. It was emergency remote learning. It was not effective digital learning. And so we've seen some reports, including a report from UNESCO recently that came out and said, see, look, this digital learning stuff doesn't really work. Well, that's not what you should be looking at, right? And I think we have to be very careful that while it did meet a need during the time, it's never been the sort of learning that anybody has been talking about when we talk about how to use technology effectively. And so that's what we need to be shifting to. We need to say, hey, time to move out of the tent. We did the tent thing. We got through pandemic. Time to build the house. And the difference, by the way, to carry the metaphor probably too far, is the difference between a tent and the house is built on a foundation. And in this case, a foundation of effective learning, effective pedagogy. And that's really what we need to move to. Now, I don't...
And you're not applause.
Absolutely. Look, and I don't think it's all bad what happened during the pandemic, because the good news, the silver lining, if we can find any silver lining from the pandemic, is it did push us to finally address some long-standing infrastructure issues. There are many parts of the world now where we work. Our organization works in 80 countries around the world. There are many of these countries that pre-pandemic didn't have anywhere close to the type of connectivity, device access that would be needed for any type of effective learning, right? And so the pandemic accelerated that. And that's great. That's a good step forward. What would be a terrible shame and a huge waste of money is if we actually made those steps forward in the infrastructure and then just sort of said, we're good when it comes to the approaches for using it for effective learning.
Mm-hmm. And you have good examples of things happening somewhere in the world on trying to capitalize in that energy that was generated during the pandemic to move from the tent in the storm to the house made of wood or stone or whatever.
Yeah. Look, here's the thing. There are great examples everywhere we visit. But the problem is they're just in little spots all over the place. And so what we've got to do is help make sure that is adopted broadly across the education system. One of the ways that we help with that, we have an event, we call it ISTE Live. We host it once a year, and we bring together the top education innovators from different parts of the world, and we say, hey, what does it look like to use technology effectively? This last year, we had about 20,000 of these education innovators that came together. We host this event again in June, in Denver this coming June. And so part of what we feel like our role is as a nonprofit organization is help share those stories, right? Because because they're happening. There's great examples of how technology is being used. But often, if you're in a school or a university, it could be in the classroom next to you and you don't know about it. And that's a problem. So a lot of what we have to do right now in this post-pandemic world is identify the awesome stuff that's happening and help shine a spotlight on it so that we can get more adoption.
To make it scale.
Totally, to make it scale. And one more thing, part of that is, there was a big push on infrastructure and technology access during COVID. What there was not was a big push around teacher training. And so you've seen that there's big leaps forward. We look at budgets of school systems and you say, hey, what were the areas that you spent a lot of money on, in during the pandemic? Huge amount on internet connectivity, huge amount on devices, some cases on software, and very, very little on teacher training. And so you can't expect to see big major leaps forward if we're not also preparing our teachers to be able to use technology in very different ways than they used it when they were in the classroom.
To take advantage of the technology.
Right.
Yes. So you were talking about reports that maybe take an angle that is not correct in terms of the use of technology.
Yeah.
After I have also seen these headlines on the newspapers about the use of AI and all the, the expectations from generative AI, particularly ChatGPT, which is one of the best known. Also, AI will make schools disappear, or AI will make irrelevant the work of professors or teachers. So we will not need to do whatever. No. What do you think will be the right headline for the news?
Yeah. Look, thanks for bringing it up, because I have a rule that I can't go for more than an hour without talking about AI. So thanks for checking that box.
It feels like a 20 minutes.
Right. We're about the right point. We have to be that. No. Look, I think people want extremes. We have some people that say AI is going to transform the world and it's going to save education in ways that we could never imagine. That some people say this is the worst thing to ever happen to society and we're all doomed. Right. The truth of the matter, I believe very strongly, is that the answer, first of all, is somewhere in between the two, and largely determined on us how it's going to play out. I believe that AI has deep power to help transform learning as a tool that supports educators, as a tool that is a coach to help them deal with some of the things that we talked about aligning and making learning more relevant, to have more opportunities for practice, to save a whole bunch of time on administrative tasks that distract from the time that teachers spend with students. We looked at some of the studies of the amount of time that teachers spend with students, and it is a small percentage of their overall day, because they're spending time on all these other tasks, many of which can be offloaded to AI. But if we just sit back, if the education sector just sort of sits this one out and waits to see what's going to happen, then the view of the future gets much darker. And I think it's critical that the educator community get very involved. As I've said, we work very closely with OpenAI. We work closely with the Google AI team, right? And I say to them all the time, it is critical that we have educator fingerprints all over these AI tools if we want them to become, if we want the future to be what we want it to be. Mm-hmm. And if I could just add to that, often when I start talking to educators about AI, they'll immediately go to, well, here's how we could use these tools for what we're teaching. And that's fine. And we should think about that. But there's another more important piece for our education system to grapple. And that is, what is the role of the education system in preparing young people to thrive in an AI-infused world? Mm-hmm. So think about it. All of the students that are graduating today, students that are walking around outside of this building, right? They are all going to graduate and work on teams where not all members of their team are human. We know this. This is happening already. And so what is the responsibility of an institution like Tech or any place else to prepare those students to live in that world? What do they need to know about how AI works to understand when they should use it and when they shouldn't? When should they not hand a decision off to AI because of the bias in the data? Mm-hmm. When would it be irresponsible not to hand a decision off to AI because of the bias in our data, right? There are decisions that would be far better off in the hands of AI and decisions that would be far better off in the hands of humans. And it comes down to the fact that for 100,000 years, we've never had any competition on higher level thinking skills. Humans have always been the ones to make these tough decisions. We've never had a tool, another entity, if you will, that could compete with us on this. And because of that, we've never had to really decide what are uniquely human skills. We don't know. And so we need to be spending time as the education community being really clear on what are uniquely human skills. And when we know what those are, then we need to double down on those and make sure that the kids that are coming out of our schools are really prepared to be amazing at those uniquely human traits.
Yes, I agree with you, but and I think there's another thing related to competencies, development of skills in AI. But before going to that, I want to say that sometimes we think of AI of the things that are on the border of of knowledge, or on the state of the art of knowledge, because right now we don't think of calculators like doing something that humans do. And in fact, in the past we think a calculator is something that is taking the place of something that humans used to do. Only humans need to do that. Also, and other kind of things that now we take for granted in those IRI, like playing chess or Go or whatever. No, these are just games, but in fact, it's things that humans do. So AI is always like we think of AI of the things that are always on the state of the art or on the edge. No, so now coming back to the second thing that I wanted to add to what you said, and I completely agree. It's what are the things, and I'm talking now disciplinary things that we have to stress in our curriculum, or the competency that we have to stress, and what are the ones that we have maybe to make more less relevant in the curriculum because they will not be important in the future because they will be done by AI. And I think that part of this is what are the things that I will have to know to understand that the output of an AI is giving me something that is valid, relevant, not biased, etc. So that's how I believe our curriculum will start to change, and also our evaluation, because most of the visual response that we have had from the education community about the use of generative AI is on evaluation, or that is how a student can do an essay or a project or whatever, a thesis, just by putting some prompts on a computer.
Right. Look, we could go have a whole day of conversation just on that question they brought up. Look, let's start with the assessment piece, right? Assessing learning. I actually think that AI is one of the best things that could ever happen to assessing learning, because it is finally shining a spotlight on how bad our assessments are. If you look at a lot of ways that there's been actually a fair amount of innovation in education over the years, in really good, positive ways. But if you look at how we assess student learning, there's been very little innovation. And most of what we do for assessment is just embarrassingly bad. And so if you are an institution and you're worried about cheating because of AI, the problem isn't AI. The problem is that your assessments stink. And it's a great opportunity to rethink those. And to get back to the other part of your question, I think we're going to need to start shifting a bit away from this sort of rote memorization stuff. A lot of our tests are, I'm the teacher, I said this thing. What is the thing I said? And you're supposed to write down exactly what I said, right? That's not helpful. And we need to be allowing some of that rote memorization to be offloaded to tools like AI, because in this complicated world that we live in, and it is far more complicated than it was 50 years ago, the need for deeper conceptual understandings of concepts is much greater. And that's harder. And we have to free up some time and space to get to that. And if we're just memorizing facts all day, we're losing the time that we need to really double down. And one more comment you made, you talked about calculators. So I was talking to some math teachers the other day. This isn't great. I love this conversation. And one of them said to us, if you were going to go get a group of people to go make the case for why education should adopt AI, you should go get math teachers, because we've lived through this with calculators.
And this later,
And yes,
I was one of them.
they all, right. And
This is too.
they all said, we are, it was recent enough that we all remember teaching when calculators came out. And we thought, oh, we can't have this. How could you have calculators? And now, of course, the math curriculum has evolved in such a way that it would be crazy to teach math without using calculators, right? There are some basic concepts you need to understand, but they need to teach these deeper math concepts. And so having the calculator to help you get to those deeper concepts is really important. So they were joking about having the math teachers as the champions, right?
I agree with them, and I can tell you by experience that on my first semester of the university, I learned to use this label, because that was the thing. For those that are listening to the podcast, is like,
if you don't know what that is, go to Wikipedia and look up slide view.
It's actually a mechanical device that you use to make some calculation things, and they consider that if you use the scientific calculator that exists at the time, you were not going to understand how to use this library.
Right.
That is a very important tool for engineers. But what they were not thinking is that the slide rule, the calculator was not only changing the way you evaluate math, it was changing the word in general.
Yeah.
So the way that our students, or me as a student, will be working will be a word that will be using calculators and then computers and other things, for our work. So you have to embed that into the curriculum. So
that's right.
I agree with you. The sooner that we understand, we have to. I don't think we have a consensus right now. It's something that we have to experiment to try and understand what will be the impact on real world, so that we understand how we connect the students with that world. Right. That will be in abundance of AI, I think. Yeah.
And look, just to be clear, I am not saying that AI doesn't come with challenges and problems, right? Don't misunderstand. It absolutely does. But it's on us to make sure we're really figuring out where are the really powerful ways to use it in the context to use it, and where should it, be human skills that we rely on. And that's the conversation that we need to be having. And you can't have that conversation if you haven't explored the use of AI. It's surprising to me, even now, how many teachers and faculty members I talk to that still haven't really explored ways to use AI. Or if they have, maybe they've only used, ChatGPT. ChatGPT is great, but there's many other tools that we should be considering if we're going to be exploring what AI can do.
So I want to ask you a last question before we say bye, Sharon. And a couple of months ago, I was in a conference in Europe, and I met someone that was doing a tour in different countries in Latin America, working for UNESCO to lobby for regulations on AI in general and in education. So what's your view about the regulation of AI? We can talk in general, but in particular for education.
Happy to. Look, my background, again, I worked for the White House of the United States for many years. I'm very familiar with where regulation is helpful and where it's not helpful. And I will tell you that it is almost never a good idea to regulate around a particular technology, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we don't need regulation, but let's be clear, technology is changing at a pace much faster than regulations could ever change. And so for the most part, what we want to look at is not regulating around a technology like AI, but regulate around principles, right? And so for example, if we talk about tools and we want to make sure tools keep student data safe, for example, that would be something you might want to regulate around. If we want to make sure that data is interoperable, that's something we might want to regulate around. Should we regulate around making sure that there are learning experiences, curriculum and learning experiences for students to learn how to be healthy and effective digital citizens? Yes, but that's what you make the regulation, or making specific regulations around tech is sort of silly. So if I have a website, there's a whole bunch of websites that are using AI and I could show them to you, and you wouldn't be able to tell me which one was or wasn't. In the next couple of years, it will be hard to find any website that isn't using AI in some way, shape, or form. So are we saying we should regulate on a tech that, unless you're a computer programmer, you can't even tell whether it's using AI or not? It just doesn't make any sense.
Or the photo has Photoshop.
No, right.
Filters.
So the intent, and I want to be clear, the intent behind the regulations is good. And the suggestion, if there's anybody listening to this who's in a role where they can control policy, make the regulation around principles. And whether those show up through AI or through a website that doesn't use AI or through some other technology that isn't invented yet, then your regulation is applicable. But around, if you're focusing on a particular tech tool, that's going to end up probably not having the intended consequence that you would hope.
Maybe I will add another question before.
Yeah, keep going.
I just remember that I read an article that was claiming that there's like a sweet spot for regulations. So when there's a new thing that comes like this, if you regulate too soon, you may be stopping innovation or something like that. But if you do it too late, then maybe the beast is already, running. Maybe we could take an example with what happened with social networks in general. So they say there's like a sweet spot. What do you think about that?
Oh, I agree with that. We were way too late on social media. But again, is it social media that we want to regulate, or is it healthy tech use for kids? Whether it's a social media site or some other tool on the internet, right? I don't care if there is healthy tech use that we're establishing with our kids. It doesn't matter what flavor of website comes along. And so I do agree that we have to be careful at using regulation is a big hammer, and we got to be careful at using regulation too quickly. But we shouldn't wait too long as it's at the principle level. Let me just give an example of this, and I won't share the country, but we were advising a country, a Ministry of Education, and they were creating a policy around AI. It was regulations. It was early on. This was several months ago, so it was early on in the phase. And as I was talking to him about this, I finally stopped and I said, "You guys haven't really used AI, have you?" I could just tell they hadn't used generative AI very much.
ChatGPT workshop.
Right. And I said, "Has anybody explored this?" Nobody had. And so the idea of us making regulations, regardless of the timing, if we haven't actually explored the tools, is not a good idea. And so this is a great moment to be exploring. Let's explore. Let's work in collaboration with the folks that are developing these tools, and then absolutely make the regulations, but do them on principles and make sure whatever the underlying technology is, if it's a solid principle, it's going to align to it.
Great advice. Thank you very much, Richard. Maybe just tell our audience where they can find more information about what you do.
Happy to. So if you're interested in the AI work that we do, if you go to ISTE.org, ISTE.org/AI, you'll find a whole bunch of resources, including guides to help bring AI into schools, and even our own AI bot called Stretch AI that we're building. We're building an AI tool for educators. So check that out there. And also you could just go to ISTE.org, ISTE.org, and you'll see all the other stuff that we do around computer science, around STEM and learning, around using technology to teach arts, and a whole bunch of other topics. So hope we run into some of your guests there.
I'm sure they will do. Thanks a lot, Richard, for sharing with us and being with us here in Monterrey. And see you soon, I hope, in January 24 in our conference, IFE conference.
I can't wait. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the great work you're doing.
For more information, visit observatory.tech.mx/edutrendspodcast and ife.tech.mx. A special thanks to Tecnológico de Monterrey, the Institute for the Future of Education, and the Tec Sounds team. Tec Sounds producer, Miguel Mejia. EduTrends producers, Esteban Venegas and Cristian Igosa. Stay tuned and play Tec Sounds in your favorite podcast app for other great shows and content.